So everyone, I give you Sir Walter Scott. Well, Sir Walter Scott gives you Sir Walter Scott. He's a very famous person. I can't take credit for it. And to be honest, he's quite safe. I found nothing particularly damning or condemning of Sir Walter Scott. But he marks a very useful turning point and marks a very good starting point. So, the Enlightenment in Edinburgh, another time where things were going very well. Our golden age, our wonderful new town, look at it, isn't it splendid? It really is. So far I've talked about, in loose terms, sort of money. I've talked about how a person over there owned slaves, but I don't feel like I've fleshed out and gotten to the point of what I'm trying to get to. So, Sir Walter Scott, figures like him, Robert Burns, David Hume, many others, all sort of represented Edinburgh at its golden period, at its most wealthy, at its most prosperous. The university just over there, and you can see New College just there, and we'll be going there in a bit, starting to prosper, starting to make its mark felt in the world. We called ourselves the Athens of the North. How the Athenians felt about that, I don't know, but we thought we were that good. We built on Colonial Hill, where I would have also loved to have taken you today, but very much Beltane territory. On Colonial Hill, we built the Edinburgh Monument in the sort of early half of the 1800s. Things were going great. And it was all us, wasn't it? Industrialisation was flying through. Everything was wonderful. There are people that are not acknowledged. So I've touched on how Scots did own slaves, how Scots were heavily involved. How heavily involved were we, I suppose, is something that I should maybe address. That is a very easy answer. We were disproportionately involved. The statistics on that do not lie. For me, it's not something that is a matter of debate. I'm sure people would love to debate it in different circles. However, the statistics are incredibly damning of us as a nation, unfortunately. But I think it's important to own up to these things. So, by this turn of the 19th century, Jamaica in the Caribbean was Britain's most prosperous and wealthy slave colony. It was a slave economy. Vast amounts of resources were produced there, and remember, shipped into Leith. And predominantly Glasgow, but Leith as well, Dundee, Aberdeen. Now, while this is going on, the population of white people in Jamaica was around 20,000. Of that 20,000, 10,000 were Scottish. The second largest slave colony and second most profitable was Guyana in South America. Again, the Scots clearly found a way to deal with the weather and dominated in Guyana. A Guardian article was recently published on it as well. This is starting to come into the public eye, but before then, I don't know how many of you had heard about Scotland's involvement with Guyana. I certainly had not. Many other of the Caribbean islands, such as St. Lucius and Kitts, Tobago as well. Gordon, in fact, his slave holdings were in Tobago. That's where the plantations were. So all over the Caribbean, we see the mark of Scotland and Scottish people, Scots going abroad and doing very well out of being there. Robert Burns, one of these figures that gives us so much pride. Unfortunately, in 1786, very nearly went out to the colonies, very nearly went out to Jamaica. His friend, Patrick Douglas, was trying to get him out of a mire. He had hit economic ruin and his personal life was not going very well. And so, going out there to find his fortune seemed like the way to do things. It seemed like the best option, and he was set to go if he had not published a very successful book that went big overnight. He would have gone. Robert Burns would have never been the person we remember now. I'm not saying this makes him the world's worst person, but it does mean that we can see ourselves being very much deeply tied into these societies of slavery that we have as recently as 2001, completely written ourselves out of. And indeed, in terms of the imports coming in, it was also Scottish dominated. Predominantly into Glasgow, I must say. Edinburgh was not the heart of imports. It makes far more sense with Glasgow being on the Atlantic, but this is the Edinburgh version of the two. And so, by the mid-1800s, 40% of tobacco imports came into Scotland. 40%. That is an incredibly disproportionate number, considering at the time the percentage of Scots in the the percentage of Scottish population in Britain was only 10%. So we can really see ourselves being disproportionately involved, and the most marked one is compensation. 15% of that £20 million went to Scottish slavers. 15% for only 10% of the population. It doesn't sound like much, but what that does mean is in Britain, you were more likely to get compensation if you were Scottish than any other nationality. We were hugely involved in slavery, in what went on and how it happened. And it's because of figures like Burns and Walter Scott that it's so easy to forget about it, because we managed to portray ourselves as this wonderful country that did it by themselves, that did it alone. But it is built on the backs and the suffering of so many. And I suppose in the writing of new narratives of Scotland, maybe we will acknowledge those people, maybe we'll look at the differences of how history, of different moments in history. It doesn't mean that everything needs to be rewritten, but it does mean that we need acknowledgement and we need appreciation. So I won't labour that point too much. I think I've said all I would like to say about, well, so not much about Sir Walter. He does come up at the very end of the tour, so I loosely link him. But this monument, again, this whole new town, the time of its prosperity directly coincides with the huge spike in slave trade, with the huge rise in the power of the British Empire. The new town is a testimony to the British Empire. You have Princes Street for the princes. You have Rose Street because it is the national flower of England. The counter, you have Thistle Street. Then in the middle, George Street for the king at the time, George III, not the fourth, who has his bridge just over there. And then Queen Street. Empire is writ large on this. And it was built for, it was paid for and built with money made from slavery. Not entirely or exclusively, but hugely contributing. So up on the mound, the Edinburgh National Monument, known among tour guides, and I think many of us, as Edinburgh's disgrace, purely for the fact it never got finished, much like our trams. Very good insert joke here, thank you. Never got finished, but £10,000 of it were funded with a grant given by the Parliament. That Parliament was a Parliament at the time which was British, but one that clearly gave Edinburgh a lot of money, and that money was very much built on the backs of slave and imperial economies. So I'm appreciative of the fact that it's quite traffic heavy down here, and to be honest, I think I've said what I have to say on this phase of the tour. So we're going to take a wander up to the mound. Like I say, we will pause halfway through because hills are horrible and we start to get a nice view, and it's always nice to appreciate a view. So follow me.
Niall, there's no through access.
There's no through access. Thank you, James.